Hello and good evening. I'm Dr. Brian Henning. I'm professor of philosophy and environmental studies here at Gonzaga University, where I have the distinct pleasure of also directing our Center for Climate, Society, and the Environment. Thank you all so much for joining us here this evening in the beautiful Myrtle Wolson Performing Arts Center here on the campus of Gonzaga University. As we begin, I would like to thank and recognize the many colleagues who helped make this event possible, including the wonderful staff here at the Wolson, as well as colleagues from across campus, including Cindy Perry, Becky Wilkie in Public Safety, Mary Joan Hahn, Dan Nayland, Jessica Mayer, Whitney Franklin, Laurel Burlingame, and most especially my wonderful colleague, Carly Hohenbein. Please join me in thanking them for making this possible. Tonight's event is being recorded, and it will be shared online on our website in the coming days. If you have other friends and colleagues that you'd like to share it with, that will be available. You can also subscribe to our mailing list so that you're notified of future events as well as when this is available. In the spirit of the Jesuit practice of composition of place, we recognize that Gonzaga University resides on the homelands of the Spokane tribal people. This land holds the spirit of the first people of this place, the people of the river. We remember that Gonzaga University would not exist were our Jesuit founders not invited by local indigenous community members to start this school. We are grateful to be part of this biotic community and ask for its support as we work to manifest our intentions during this gathering of hearts, minds, and spirits. Our event this evening is co-sponsored by the Gonzaga Jesuit community, as well as the Gonzaga Office of Mission Integration. And the host and lead sponsor is the Gonzaga Center for Climate, Society, and the Environment. Founded in 2021, just 2 years ago next month, the Gonzaga Climate Center was created to provide resources and opportunities to meet the unprecedented challenges facing humanity and the wider natural environment in the 21st century. Informed by an abiding commitment to a just society and care for our common home, the Gonzaga Climate Center serves our university and our region by promoting innovative, interdisciplinary scholarship, teaching, consulting, and capacity building on that intersection of climate, society, and the environment. Hosting events such as this evening's lecture is a central part of our mission. In addition to hosting important scholars and leaders, we're engaged in both long-term and immediate responses to the climate crisis. For instance, responding to the youth who are tired of their elders putting their own selfish short-term interests above their own well-being and future, the Climate Center created what we call the Climate Literacy Project. In partnership with state and local leaders, the Climate Literacy Project not only provides direct professional education workshops to K-12 teachers, but it also trains Gonzaga undergraduates to serve as climate literacy fellows. This work brings our Gonzaga students directly into elementary and middle school classrooms, where they provide hands-on climate literacy lessons to young people. Over just the last 2 years, the Climate Literacy Project has served more than 300 K-12 teachers from 19 school districts who collectively have the potential to reach more than 6,000 K-12 students annually. While through our climate literacy work, we seek to walk with the youth on the long path to renewal, our Climate Resilience Project focuses on the immediate existential needs of people within our community. As we saw with the deadly 2021 heat dome that killed 20 people in Spokane County, over 100 people in our state, and over 800 people in the Northwest, there's an urgent need to better understand and respond to the challenges of extreme heat and wildfire smoke. In partnership with local community centers and nonprofits, as well as the City of Spokane, Spokane County, the Washington Department of Health, and others, the Gonzaga Climate Center launched an initiative to better understand who is most impacted by extreme heat events and how we might better plan for them in the future. Through community-focused and engaged research that will soon be published, the Climate Center has revealed that in Spokane, There's a very significant and strong positive correlation between urban heat and the percentage of the population living under the poverty line. In other words, just as around the world, those who have the least are hurt first and worst. By providing decision support to city and county leaders, the Climate Center hopes to do its part to help our community and our leaders to respond to this great challenge. In the 21st century in Spokane, Washington, there's no reason that our friends and neighbors should be dying of extreme heat. We thank our many generous supporters who help us live up to our grand mission to understand and respond to this most urgent challenge of our age. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome to the stage Gonzaga University's president. Dr. Thane McCullough holds a BA from Gonzaga and was awarded a PhD in experimental social psychology from Oxford University. He first began working at Gonzaga in 1990, and from his roots in student affairs, has remained fundamentally focused on students. He is deeply committed to a broadly based liberal arts education that prepares students to be critical thinkers, outstanding professionals, and living exemplars of the Jesuit imperative to be persons with and for others. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to President McCullough.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to take an opportunity to thank Dr. Brian Henning, who just spoke, both for his leadership of the Center for Climate, Society, and the Environment, and for his efforts in support of bringing our distinguished speaker here tonight. Dr. Henning has long been a passionate advocate for environmental care and sustainability here at Gonzaga, and I am grateful for his work on behalf of this community and the broader ecosystems of which we are a part. Would you please join me in thanking Dr. Henning for his leadership? Our distinguished speaker this evening is Cardinal Michael Czerny. He was born in Brno, Czechoslovakia in 1946. His mother's family were Jewish converts to Catholicism, and after the Nazis occupied Czechoslovakia, his maternal grandparents and two of his mother's brothers were interned in Terezin, where his grandfather died. The others were moved to Auschwitz, and the brothers died there in labor camps. His mother, because she was Jewish, was forced into farm labor and then imprisoned for 20 months. His father was forced to farm labor for refusing to divorce her. His parents ultimately immigrated to Canada by ship in 1948, bringing Michael and his brother. Following his 1963 graduation from Loyola High School in Montreal, Czerny joined the Jesuits on the 14th of August, 1964. He has a Bachelor of Classics and Philosophy degree, which was granted by Gonzaga University in 1968. He taught for a year at Gonzaga High School in St. John's, pursuing further studies in theology in Chicago and at Regis College in Toronto. His doctorate was granted by the University of Chicago in interdisciplinary studies in 1978. He is considered uniquely qualified to tackle the complexities of the climate crisis because Cardinal Czerny has worked on complicated and urgent issues for the Church ever since being ordained as a Jesuit priest in 1973 in the Upper Canadian province, now the Jesuit province of Canada. In 1979, he co-founded the Jesuit Center for Social Faith and Justice in Toronto, where he served as its first director until 1989. In 1991, Following the murder of 6 Jesuits and others at the University of Central America in San Salvador, he assumed the director's role of the university's Institute for Human Rights, a position that had been held by one of the murdered priests. And he also served as vice rector for social outreach. He later worked with the United Nations in mediating an end to that country's civil war. In 2002, he founded the African AIDS Network, serving as director until 2010, where he coordinated efforts in nearly 30 sub-Saharan African countries to provide healthcare, education, and social services for victims of HIV/AIDS, channeling funding from a multitude of foreign sources in the process. With his 2015 letter, Laudato Si, on care for our common home, Pope Francis invited people of all backgrounds to undergo an ecological conversion in order to live in better harmony with God, with one another, and with all of God's creation. Therefore, a great cultural, spiritual, and education challenge stands before us, and it will demand that we set out on a long path of renewal. In 2016, Pope Francis assigned Cardinal Czerny a major role in working with migrants and refugees around the world, and in 2019, he was made Cardinal of the Church. In the Cardinal's newly released book, Siblings All, Signs of the Times, the Social Teachings of Pope Francis, he provides an overview of Pope Francis's contribution to Catholic social teaching, drawing especially on his teaching in Fratelli Tutti. In April of 2022, Pope Francis appointed Cardinal Czerny to lead the Vatican Office for the Promotion of Integral Human Development. In this work, he serves to assist the Church in promoting the integral development of each person, which of course includes care of our common home. Given how climate-related disasters disproportionately affect the world's poorest citizens, Czerny's work involves not just the science of climate change, but migration patterns, social services, global economics, and much more. Truly, it is our honor tonight to welcome to this campus a distinguished Gonzaga alumnus and a true servant, leader of the Church and for the world community. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the Prefect for the Congregation for the Promotion of Integral Human Development, His Eminence, Cardinal Michael Czerny of the Society of Jesus.
I hope there's as much applause afterwards as there was before. Your Excellency, Bishop Daly, President McCullough, and dear guests and friends. First, I'm going to briefly tell you some background. And then, at greater length, I'm going to suggest what you should read. And finally, I'm going to compactly lay out things to do. And all of this in an hour. In 1966-68, when I was an undergraduate here, we young Jesuits in formation, we were known as scholastics, or even better, as philosophers, we were just beginning to come down the hill from Mount St. Michael's and take classes here on campus. It was wonderful. The new Cataldo had just opened, the new Crosby Library too, and the new athletic complex. What did the world look like? I don't remember words like ecology and environment. 3 Mile Island, the nuclear disaster in Pennsylvania was still more than 10 years in the future. Instead, Vietnam was the key word. With Boeing just across the Rockies from here, we'd occasionally see a B-52 overhead on a trial flight before being commissioned for service overseas. We also began hearing about napalm, a lethal mixture of gas or diesel with a sticky gel. One such firebomb could destroy 2,500 square yards of terrain, and about 1 million tons were dropped on Vietnam each year between 1965 and 1973. The terrible logic was, drain the pond to catch the fish. With the Viet Cong proving hard to eliminate, napalm was about making their habitat uninhabitable. So, without knowing it, napalm was an early, if terrible, lesson on the interconnectedness of human and environmental destruction. Digging even deeper in my memory, I realize now that we had an intimation of the coming ecological revolution. I remember that in his wonderful courses on European literature, Professor Cornel Scovaja taught us about the Romantic poets, expressing great emotive sympathy for our fellow feeling with nature. And I now see how important such empathy is for us in so-called advanced cultures if we are to get beyond the cold, flat, objective view and recover the awe for creation that Native people have. It may be odd to hear about environmental learning in literature rather than in science classes. Now it's quite clear that the emotional or sentimental bonds that connect us with our fellow creatures are an important access to reality and an important motivator for taking necessary action. So I thank Professor Scovaja for preparing me for this. Pope Francis invites us to follow St. Francis of Assisi by immersing ourselves in the wonder and awe of nature, which makes us feel united with all that exists. In contrast with the Sturm und Drang of the Romantics, who perceived in the irrational manifestations of nature a vaguely divine character, St. Francis celebrates the beauty of nature as a work of the Lord, a wonder in our eyes. Nature is an expression of the love of a personal God who brought the universe into being, something other than himself, and reflecting his providence and love. Hobbes was also on the menu then. From him we learned the Latin proverb, homo homine lupus est, which could be rendered as, man is a wolf to humanity. Nowadays, we rightly protest that the saying is insulting to the wolves, who don't even come close to the destructive capacity of human leaders with whom Hobbes compares them. Yes, 1968 was a turning point, not just my graduation, a turning point in both the first and second worlds. But when you're in the midst of such a seismic shift, you don't even realize what's going on. In 2023, 55 years later, equally seismic shifts are going on, and so we must realize that they're happening. Frightening news of climate-related disasters, wildfires, hurricanes, floods, and droughts, record summer highs and warmer winters with terrible cold snaps. Such news comes at us almost daily and from almost everywhere in the world. Millions of families are fleeing, their homes and livelihoods destroyed by climate. And these are people often, but not always, in resource-poor places without the means to bounce back. Since 1968, the world seems to have become a lot smaller, more fragmented, and more interconnected. What happens in one small corner of the world instantly gets transmitted via internet or social media. Many, many voices are demanding our attention, and it's very noisy. If you had invited me after the Earth Summit of 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, or even after the Summit on Sustainable Development of 2002 in Johannesburg, both of which I was involved in, I would have spent most of my speech sharing the news that these two landmark conferences had taught us, and trying to persuade you that the environment was really important and urgent. With luck, I would have persuaded about 20% of my listeners. For the other 80%, it would have been too much of a stress to agree that we humans need to pay attention to the natural environment and to our fellow creatures. Another 20 years have passed, and today everyone knows. The problem now isn't ignorance, so I'm not going to spend the hour trying to convince you. You are already convinced. The real problem, instead, is indifference and despair. So you ask what to read, and I'm happy to give you a reading list. The reading list is Pope Francis's encyclicals, Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti. Let us read these letters to the world together, so that instead of saying, yes, I heard about them, you can proudly say, they're my way, and what about you? Francis sets the stage by addressing his encyclicals not just to the Catholic world, as has been traditional, but to every person living on this planet, in order to enter into dialogue with all people about our common home. Laudato Si begins with a full immersion into reality. The first chapter is entitled with the question, what is happening to our common home? And maybe it was the first time the question had been raised in this way. Pope Francis alerts us to the fact that our common home is crumbling around us, with evidence which includes the climate emergency, unprecedented loss of biodiversity, pollution, depletion of natural resources, etc., etc. These several aspects of the present ecological crisis are what the Holy Father calls cracks in the planet we inhabit. It is a long list of cracks, and certainly an alarming one. Moreover, it's not just the earth that is crying out. Millions of our siblings are crying too. Moreover, these people who have least contributed to causing the crisis in the first place are usually its early and disproportionate victims. So far from just a green document, Laudato Si is actually a full-blown social encyclical. As an attentive reader of Laudato Si points out, climate is mentioned just 14 times, while the poor are mentioned 60 times. We have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment, so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. How did we get to this? Pope Francis offers a clue in the third chapter entitled The Human Roots of the Ecological Crisis. I think it is the most difficult chapter of Laudato Si. It is horrible. It is important to shed light on the accusations it makes and the questions it raises, especially at a university where young people should be formed to think realistically and critically. Pardon me. This is also part of an environmental talk. There's no responding to the ecological crisis unless we are willing to dig deeper and unearth the underlying root causes. For it would hardly be helpful to describe the symptoms without acknowledging the human origins of the ecological crisis. Otherwise, there'll be no coming out of such a complex crisis. And all the elements have a common source. They ultimately stem from a mindset, a worldview, a flat way of perceiving the natural world and relating with it. This way of understanding human life and activity has gone awry to the serious detriment of the world around us. And Pope Francis invites us to focus on the dominant technocratic paradigm and the place of human beings and of human action in the world. The technocratic paradigm, and this sounds like something very formal, very foreign, but in fact, the point of this evening's talk is for us to recognize that we've bought into it. The technocratic paradigm ends up determining the kind of society we want to build. Pope Francis draws inspiration from the 20th century theologian Romano Guardini. The technological paradigm has become so dominant that it would be difficult to do without its resources, and even more difficult to utilize them without being determined by their internal logic. What is this internal logic? What are the deepest roots of the dominant technocratic paradigm which subjects our mode of living and operating in the world to its ironclad logic? Three pillars prop up the conceptual paradigm of modernity. First, we are totally in charge. It's called anthropocentrism. Secondly, all the rest is engineering, mechanics. And thirdly, my me is at war with all my siblings and with nature, selfishness. The paradigm exalts the concept of a subject who, using logical and rational procedures, progressively approaches and gains control over an external object. Men and women have constantly intervened in nature, but for a long time this meant being in tune with and respecting the possibilities offered by the things themselves. It was a matter of receiving what nature itself allowed us as if from its own hand. Now, by contrast, we are the ones to lay our hands on things, attempting to extract everything possible from them, while frequently ignoring or forgetting the reality in front of us. Human beings and material objects no longer extend a friendly hand to one another. The relationship has become confrontational and exploitative. Modernity's dominant technocratic and economic paradigm pits us against the natural world and against one another. The economy and polity, and to a large extent the educational systems, curricula, and programs all operate within the paradigm. We are part and parcel of the problem. Our most prestigious centers of higher education continue to breed engineers and entrepreneurs, lawyers and managers who measure success narrowly in terms of economic output and profit margins alone, at the cost of human and planetary well-being, even if this means depleting life-sustaining resources and destroying our common ecosystems. But since, according to Einstein, we cannot solve a problem with the same mentality that created it in the first place, a very new mindset is needed. I'm here to ask, is it on offer here at Gonzaga? We are all connected, Pope Francis repeats throughout Laudato Si, and in a complementary sense throughout Fratelli Tutti. We are interconnected with the creative world, with all our other siblings in the human family, and with those waiting to come after us. The self-sufficient isolation of the Marlborough man is a very false myth. We exist only within a web of relationships. Human life is grounded in three fundamental and closely intertwined relationships: with God, with our neighbor, and with the earth itself. Everything is related, and we human beings are united as siblings on a wonderful pilgrimage, unfolding in the love of God, in the love God has for each of his creatures, and which also unites us in fond affection with brother sun, sister moon, brother river, and mother earth. Remember I said that Laudato Si is about what needs doing? Now Fratelli Tutti is about who is supposed to do it. The encyclical is on fraternity and social friendship. Our interrelated and interdependent human existence is its core message. If Laudato Si reminds us that the earth is our common home and shared inheritance, Fratelli Tutti emphasizes that we are all created siblings, members of a single family. Am I my sibling's keeper? To disown this responsibility, as Cain did, is a choice which can only lead to fratricide and ecocide, as we are seeing around us. So Fratelli Tutti highlights two key messages: the call to solidarity and the invitation to dialogue. The second chapter is the most touching, dedicated to a parable told by Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago. And you know it well. It goes like this. We'll just read excerpts. A lawyer asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And Jesus replied, "A man fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A Samaritan came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend.'" Did you notice that Jesus, the narrator, the mugged fellow, the 2 clerics passing by, and the innkeeper are all Jewish? The other passerby could also have been Jewish without ruining the story, except that Jesus had a hugely important point to make about tribe. Neighbors without borders could be a contemporary translation. My neighbors include indigenous people driven out of their homelands in the Amazon, as vast swaths of tropical forests are slashed down for mining or agribusiness. My neighbors include communities displaced on Pacific islands like Tuvalu or Kiribati by rising sea levels, with encroaching waters destroying homes and livelihoods. My neighbors include migrants from sub-Saharan Africa, where year-long droughts lead to hunger and desperate people undertake perilous journeys across the Mediterranean or the English Channel. My neighbors include families trying to cross the Mexican border to get into the United States, as living conditions deteriorate in their homeland, increasingly affected by floods, hurricanes, and lawlessness. My neighbors are from other tribes. Jesus wants us to notice that being like me in origin, race, language, religion, orientation, political affiliation are all irrelevant when answering the question, who is my neighbor? Who is my sibling? Genuine humanity, or call it love if you like, does not care if a neighbor or sibling, and these two are the same also, comes from here or some other place. For love shatters the chains that keep us isolated and separate. In their place, it builds bridges. Love enables us to embrace one great family where all of us can feel at home and together care for our common home. So unless we get beyond tribalism, we won't be able to offer our poor, beaten up, half-dead world the first aid it needs more and more each day. The complaint that everything is broken is answered by the claim that it can't be fixed, or what can I do? This feeds into disillusionment and despair and hardly encourages a spirit of solidarity and generosity. Plunging people into despair closes a perfectly perverse circle. Such is the agenda of the invisible dictatorship of hidden interests that have gained mastery over both resources and the possibility of thinking and expressing opinions. By the way, whenever I say something radical, it's a quote from the Pope. An effective antidote to indifference and despair is to invest time, talents, and energy in compassion, solidarity, charity, and the preferential option for the poor. These are the best ways of seeking the common good, actively restoring us as siblings, rebuilding our common home, and healing despair and anxiety. Solidarity is both intergenerational among everyone who's on the planet now, and intergenerational between current and future generations. It is also a question of eco-justice, namely concern for the poor and vulnerable members of our common household right now, whose life on this earth is brief and who cannot keep on waiting. Eco-justice demands that the right to development of the poor and the alleviation of poverty be placed at the heart of an intelligent, moral response to the crisis of our common home. We need to hear more about eco-justice in our universities. Solidarity is also intergenerational. Our inability to think seriously about future generations is linked to our inability to broaden the scope of our present interests and to give consideration to those who remain excluded from development. The environment is part of a logic of receptivity. The environment is on loan to each generation, which must then hand it on to the next. If Laudato Si speaks of the situation and our shared responsibility, the parable of the Good Samaritan eloquently presents the basic decision we need to make in order to rebuild our wounded world. The path that Pope Francis indicates is dialogue. This is something absolutely vital in a university, especially in a country like the United States, where both as society and church we have become so polarized. Dialogue is also needed between disciplines. It is too easy to fall into the temptation of excessive or even exclusive focus on one type of education or expertise. So let me mention the publication which you received at the door and which I hope you will enjoy. Our Common Home was jointly produced by the dicastery that I direct and the prestigious Stockholm Environment Institute. Intense and fruitful dialogue took place between two usually counterposed sectors, science and faith. At the launch of the publication, I described the process during which we sought to listen and learn from one another, engage in an open dialogue and empathetic dialogue about how to respond to the crises that we face in common. While starting from complementary worldviews, what we hold in common is what matters. Science and faith share core values and purpose capable of healing the world, but neither in isolation. Principles of interconnection and co-responsibility frame our climate as a common good and the planet as our common home. The call to protect, care, and regenerate creation must be a priority for everyone, regardless of one's belonging to this or that religion, or none at all. Is not dialogue the vocation of a university today in a polarized world? It is explicitly the vocation of a faith-based university in the Jesuit tradition. We're more than halfway through. And you've been so good that you deserve a break. Not an intermission, but a 1-minute chat break. Pocket your phones and let's get back. Let me re-emphasize, these two encyclicals are so important and so important together. What needs doing and who needs to do it? What needs doing and who needs to do it? And if the who's supposed to do the doing, don't recognize us as siblings, it won't get done. That's the whole talk in one sentence. Francis's two great encyclicals are not meant for library shelves. We need to convert them into action. So let me lay out the things that we need to do. Facing the environmental horrors that humans have managed to produce since the Industrial Revolution, it is not surprising to see the young as indifferent, or to hear them cry out, "Where is God in all this?" The bitter accusation is understandable, but blaming God is not helpful. A better approach is to re-ask the question, not where is God in all this, but where am I and where are we in all this? In many situations, the best antidote for despair and anxiety is thoughtful and high-minded action. Earlier, I spoke of myself and my classmates who experienced the Vietnam War and the upheaval of the 1960s. Pouring out into the streets, we protested the war and other social evils. A significant fruit of such activism was Earth Day. First celebrated in 1970, it brought an estimated 20 million people together at educational and community sites across the United States. Among the driving forces behind those epical events, I remember, were mainly universities and the famous 1968 generation of young people. Now fast forward to September 2019. Climate protests took place in 4,500 locations in 150 countries across the world. This time around, the movement was led not by university students or faculty, but by school children and teenagers. Where were the universities? I leave you to ponder that question. But let's agree that the current planetary emergency is all too serious to leave to the kids alone. Universities need, once again, to become hotbeds of critical thinking and incubators of radical action. In fact, some enthusiastic responses to Laudato Si did come from universities, and Catholic ones in particular. One of the earliest was the Statement of Leaders in Catholic Higher Education Globally, signed by nearly 100 university presidents from the United States alone. Gonzaga's president, Thane McCullough, is one of the original 169 signatories. Less admirable is the fact that between 1,200 and 1,500 Catholic universities haven't signed yet. The statement welcomes the encyclical as timely, comprehensive, and inspiring, and embraces its urgent call to action to address the climate and justice crises threatening the climate. The leaders in Catholic education say, we commit ourselves globally to integrate care for the planet, integral human development, and concern for the poor within our research projects, our educational curricula, and public programming, our institutional infrastructures, policies, and practices, and our political and social involvements as colleges and universities. They must have seen my talk ahead of time because they seem to have said the same thing. And we're glad they signed, and we're glad that the statement exists. For this is indeed a concrete, visionary, and courageous response to Pope Francis's invitation to undergo an ecological conversion, to live in better harmony with God, with one another, and with all of God's creation. Pope Francis tells us a great cultural, spiritual, and educational challenge stands before us, and it will demand that we set out on the long path of renewal. The Church seeks to inspire concrete and participatory action in the fight against the climate breakdown at local and global levels. Maybe a different way of saying the same thing that I think is very telling is for the people who are fighting against climate breakdown can say, our church is with us. Not that our church is doing it for us, but that in our struggle, our church is with us. In our struggle, our university is with us. And one day, we used to say after the revolution, one day we'll say, and the economy is with us too. One way of turning the encyclicals and the university statement into action is the ambitious Laudato Si action platform that Pope Francis launched in May 2021 on the 5th anniversary of the encyclical. And the reason I'm detailing this is because it is a coherent attempt to act. And this is what finally is the most relevant, but also the most consoling thing to know. Laudato Si Action Platform is encompassing in scope and ambitious in planning and proposing. Its purpose is to assist everyone to commit in different practical ways to contribute to integral ecology. Many sectors are involved, and you could tick off the ones that you're in so that you see there's place for you on the platform. Here are some of the sectors: individuals and families, parishes and dioceses, healthcare, agriculture, business, labor, groups and organizations, religious orders, and, of course, universities and schools. This multi-year Laudato Si action platform is organized not idealistically, but strategically in terms of goals like these. Again, as I say them, tell me how many you could tick off. Response to the cry of the earth, response to the cry of the poor, ecological economics, the adoption of sustainable lifestyles, ecological education, ecological spirituality, community resilience and empowerment, etc. With some semblance to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, these goals provide a framework within which all of us can cooperate as instruments of God for the care of creation, each according to his or her own culture, experience, involvements, and talents. The ever-growing Laudato Si action platform already counts well over 1,000 educational institutions, including Gonzaga, one of the first universities to sign on. This means aligning the university's mission, vision, and guiding principles with the values promoted by Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, and belonging to a worldwide community of committed action. Members are expected to complete the Laudato Si reflection, which each year asks, how do the university operations already reflect and connect with the vision of Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti? How does integral ecology and our all-being siblings help to understand the university's purpose? In what ways can the university foster spiritual, ecological conversion for its faculty, its staff, and its students as siblings? What are ways the university can impact the surrounding local community? The university is encouraged to complete a baseline assessment of sustainable practices, including the generation of energy and the use of water. The university is also expected to develop curriculum to include integral ecology as practiced by siblings in its courses, community service, culture, and spiritual formation. While we are glad that the Gonzaga University and administration signed on to the Laudato Si action platform, let us notice that each member of the Gonzaga community has several other options for getting involved. You can join as a family. You can join in your parish or in the diocese. You can join in an organization or group you belong to. So why join as members of Gonzaga? Your president, McCullough, said that Gonzaga believes that you, its students and friends, are called to live, learn, and explore, not comfortably at the center of the culture, but at the frontiers, the cutting edge, the margins, the places that require courage. And I would add that even if Gonzaga is an oasis of privilege for its students and an oasis of privilege for its students and staff to participate actively in the action platform is an opportunity to practice the most important chapter, number 5, of Laudato Si, the chapter on dialogue, and the most important chapter, also number 5, of Fratelli Tutti, on a better kind of politics. Dialogue is mentioned 75 times in the two encyclicals, and politics 150 times. These two patient approaches to the common good are the only way out. If it's true, let me repeat it. Dialogue and politics, dialogue and better politics, these two patient approaches to the common good, that's the goal, are the only way out. The Laudato Si action platform marshals the power of walking and working together. The precarious state of our common home calls for united responses at all levels, local, regional, national, and international. The action program highlights partnerships at various levels and wants to generate a people's movement, an alliance across churches, faith communities, educational institutions, non-governmental organizations, and governments to care for our common home and to care for one another. For an important lesson hopefully learned from the COVID-19 pandemic is that no one can be saved alone. Combating COVID-19 together and combating climate change together requires embarking together on paths of peace. And one could add that these are the paths to peace as well. Developing bonds of cooperation and embracing the weakest among us are sustainable responses to today's challenges and to tomorrow's challenges too. This couldn't be truer regarding the climate crisis and care for our common home. So, in conclusion, let me say with Pope Francis, all of us can cooperate as instruments of God for the care of creation, each according to his or her own culture, experience, involvements, and talents. Thank you so much for your kind interest. If somebody writes my autobiography, he or she will have to say that I received my first degree and also my first standing ovation at Gonzaga. And now I wish I had read the harder-hitting version of the talk. So I don't know what I'm supposed to do now.
Thank you, Cardinal Czerny, for sharing your wisdom and insight. We are so grateful that you've come all this way to inspire and challenge us to do more. Let's give him one more round of applause. As a reminder, tonight's event has been recorded and will be available on our website, gonzaga.edu/climate center. We hope that you will join us for future events that we host each semester. You can always find a complete list at gonzaga.edu/climate center events. Thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you again soon. May we all learn and lead for our common home. Good night.